Hey, folks, welcome to the program. Well, at least the pre-show to the program. Happy Wednesday evening. Just getting still set up here. And I think we are already all set up. I made sure we are all set up before I even started. So we got a couple of minutes of pre-show. Just working up to our 3 minutes after the top of the hour. Start time over on Odyssey Radio. And if you want to just listen to the show in its audio format only, you can go over to odysseyradio.com. That's ODYSY radio.com. And of course, the rest of you can sit right here and in my YouTube. Or if you're over on Facebook, you can see the show as well. Or over on my Patreon channel, which is just patreon.com/Scotty Roberts. And you can go sign up to support that channel, which helps supports this show, which helps us do more and cooler stuff. So go take a look at it over on my Patreon channel. You can also sign up on my YouTube channel, become a member. Yada, 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 yada. You can help support this show and help make it more than just a thing I do on the side. Wouldn't that be nice? Imagine the stuff we could do with this show if this were my full-time job. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you for being here. We got about 1 minute left and we go live over on Subspace Odyssey, odysseyradio.com. Welcome to everybody that's coming in. We're going to talk about a little something that maybe some of you may have heard of in history. I got to be honest and say it's something I had not heard of. With all my Native American studies and the research I've done, I did not hear of this little segment of history in Oklahoma. It took place 100 years ago. And now there's a new movie coming out by Martin Scorsese that's covering the true, well, it's based on the true story of the Osage Murders, Killers of the Flower Moon. And so I wanted to talk about that tonight because I was very intrigued by the history. We're going to go dark for a few seconds. We'll be back at the top of the hour. Sit tight.
Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Hey folks, happy Wednesday evening. I'm your host, Scotty Roberts. This is my show, the Intrepid radio program. Welcome to it. It's Wednesday night. We do Monday, Wednesday, Friday right here on Odyssey Radio. If you want to hear the show in its audio format only, go over to odysseyradio.com, ODYSY radio.com. And if you are there and you want to join in the chat room, you can come over to the YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. And you can join all the other Intrepids that are starting to gather over there for the show. And this is something I think the topic tonight, something you may or may not have heard something about, as we were talking about in the pre-show for about a minute. And there is a history here that even I didn't know of, with all of the time I have spent and the research I have spent looking at Native America, the conquering of the American West, and the subjugation, really, of the Native American peoples for the expansion of America, which does not make America a bad place. It makes America a place that has had its moments of not so good history. We all have that, even we as individuals. You can be a good person and still have dark spots in you. This is America. We've talked about this. This shouldn't make you want to turn your back on America, but it should make us learn what to do better as we continue to grow. So while America has its dark spots, its tragic moments in history, this is one of them. It's still no better place on the earth to live. I just want to say that while we're in this. But poison, jealousy, murder, ambition. This whole story of Killers of the Flower Moon is a new film that Martin Scorsese is putting out. And I didn't want this show particularly to be a review of that film. I haven't even seen it yet. So I'm going off of others' reviews. I'm reading stories about it. I'm digging into the history to find out a little bit more about this. But it tells the story that was seemingly made for Hollywood. It's a tale of how white settlers used fatal means to seize the wealth of the Osage people of Oklahoma in the early 20th century. And the film is based on David Grann's best-selling 2017 book of the same name, and it is in all fiction. Born in a very real, misguided federal policies and fueled by outsized desire of white settlers to profit from Native Americans' land, wealth, local greed resulted in the deaths of at least, get this, 60 wealthy Native American Osage people, and possibly many more. And what happened, why some are still left unsolved, and how the crime set the stage for the modern law enforcement in the United States. This was at the very beginnings of J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. So this is a story that took place about, in the 1920s. So roughly 100 years ago. So when they said, we don't think of, it's kind of funny when, like me, I was born in 1960 and I grew up in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And you don't think of the 1920s as being a century ago. But of course, now that I'm in my 60s and it's the 2020s, of course, it's 100 years. That's a century ago these things started happening. Jeremy Hansen says facts. Exactly. And so I want us to look at some of the facts behind this story, behind the book that has now become a movie that's coming out in October. I am really anticipating watching this movie because I want to see what it's all about, and I want to see how they handle it. I have already watched a couple of documentaries on the Osage Murders, and I've done some reading on it. And so I want to present this a little bit as a bit of history that you might not know much about. Because I got to tell you, before a week ago, I didn't know much about it. And it was just when I saw this trailer come across my social media feed on a movie of the same name, The Killers of the Flower Moon. I thought, what is that about? And it had Leonardo DiCaprio in it. Has Robert De Niro in it. I don't care much for Robert De Niro. I used to like him a lot more. He's an amazing actor. And I have to really work hard to separate his politics from his acting. That's why I think good actors, they don't get into politics because they don't want to lose half their public audience in a melee of politics. So Robert De Niro lost me several years ago. But I still like his acting, and I have to overlook it. It's directed by Martin Scorsese, and it's going to be a pretty intense movie. And it was already released at the Cannes Film Festival, and I think that's why people know about it, why they're already doing reviews of it, and why they're already talking about Leonardo DiCaprio, while he's had the moniker put on him before of this is the best movie he's ever done. They are now saying this is now the best movie he's ever done, and they're saying Oscar contender, but that's for neither here nor now. Now I want to go through what this story is, and I want you to know something about this story. So I think what I'm going to do, I want to start with a movie review because the review is going to give you a little bit more about what this story is from an entertainment point of view. And Killers of the Flower Moon, it's Leonardo DiCaprio delivers what they're calling now the new career best performance of his life. And I'm going to put on my glasses because I'm going to read a lot of segments from this review. And it's based on David Grann's. Now, if you haven't heard of it, you can go watch a trailer on this. Just type in YouTube "Killers of the Flower Moon," and you'll see it. And by the way, the flower moon was the first full moon, or is by Native American standards, it's the first full moon in the month of May. It's the flower moon when flowers and the prairie starts to bloom, and it's supposed to be the introduction of spring at the flower moon. If you wondered what flower moon was, so Killers of the Flower Moon. It's based on David Grant's 2017 best-selling novel, Killers of the Flower Moon. The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI was the subtitle of his book. And Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon is a grim, intense, gritty, honest telling of the rapid decline of the Osage people in the 1920s. Now, when I did my series on Bury My Hearted Wounded Knee a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, that was a retelling from the viewpoint of Native American point of view, written by D. Brown, The Conquest of the American West, what we would call the conquering of the American West. What do we call it? The winning of the American West. Well, this is the conquering of the American West. It is a dark blot, I think, on the history of the United States and some of the unscrupulous leaders that we had at that time. But we all know what unscrupulous leaders can do when they're not put in check. And it was what you might call the good side of America was wanting to expand. They wanted to be sea to shining sea. But in order to do that, they had to take away the land and the property of people who already lived here. And some will excuse that and say, well, it was a different mentality, and it was a war mentality back then, a conquering mentality, an empirical mentality. Well, I'll tell you, no matter how you slice that pie, there were people that were killed in the name of expanding our territory and expanding our hold on this continent. And they were subjugated, and they lost their homes, they lost their lives. And it's a very sad part of American history, and an even sadder part of Native American history. And when I have Reuben Fasthorse on and we talk about some of these things, you get the feel for that, and you know what we're talking about when we talk about even the way today Native American tribes, over 120 years since the last nail was in the coffin of the conquest of the American West, the late 1800s, on the cusp of the 1900s. And then you had all sorts of domination of the Native American people, the rescinding of treaty rights that were written to be in perpetuity, meaning as long as the United States stands, this treaty will stand. Oh, oops, unless we find out your land is worth something to us, we have the power to take it away. But the more conscious the public became of the way unscrupulous people were working in the government, the harder it became for the government to try to accomplish that. So I'm just going to say this. There might be some of you who disagree with my starting point on this. You might disagree with the position that I take, that the United States did some dastardly, atrocious things. But we did. But we've also are in the process of still overcoming that, of doing better. So, story of the Osage Murders in the 1920s took place roughly 20 years after events we know, like the massacre at Wounded Knee, and which we've talked about extensively. So this is only a couple of decades later. Think of what you were doing 20 years ago. You get the idea of how quick that passage of time is. But the First World War is over. Killers of the Flower Moon, it's an enthralling and an extensive cinematic experience. It's going to be studied for years to come. The ex-infantry soldier Ernest Burkett, who is played by Leonardo DiCaprio, sets his eyes on living and working for his uncle William Bill Hale, who played by Robert De Niro, in Fairfax, Oklahoma. And it's here that Ernest meets Molly Burkett, Lily Gladstone. She's an indigenous woman from the Osage Native American tribe. Molly and her family sit on a plot of incredible wealth connected to oil, just like all the other original Osage families in that area. And after her people were forcibly moved during the Indian Wars, they were forcibly moved to a supposedly uninviting, unwanted piece of land in the state of Oklahoma. And as we've seen many times over, when some of the Plains Indians were moved down to New Mexico, to the Bosque Redondo, they were sent there because it was a worthless piece of desert land that was given over to the nation, the Native American. And in perpetuity, until in the 1970s, almost 100 years later, they find that the Bosque Redondo sits atop one of the world's largest deposits of uranium. What do you suppose the battle went for over that? This is your land forever, according to treaty. And then they find out there's uranium there, the largest deposit. And I think that battle still goes on over some of that land today, 50 years later. But the Osage were sitting on this worthless piece of reservation land, and then they come to find that this land they were forcibly moved to as a nation, the Osage Nation became the wealthiest Native American nation per capita because of the oil fields that land sat on, which they didn't really know much about in the late 1800s. But with such wealth comes greed and eventually death. And murders of local Native Americans are already a frequent thing when the main character, Ernest, arrives. However, things turn for the worst when he marries Molly, gets involved in the shadier side of his uncle's business, and he's encouraged. Now, this is all true. This part of the story is based on the true facts and based closely enough that it's almost giving you the exact history of what happened. And so he's encouraged by a man named Bill Hale to marry into Molly's family. Molly is the Osage Native American woman, and it's so-called good investment. You have to marry into her family. It's a great investment for our family. And marrying an Osage with oil-rich land would give Ernest a legal claim on the territory and the profits that could be made. So he unwillingly sets out for a life with his loving and trusted wife with the ultimate goal of getting rich. And day by day, members of the Osage are killed for their land. Literally, day by day, people just started disappearing. And they're married into all these white families. But the authorities don't do anything to assist the Osage. It's only when hundreds end up dead and missing and a trip to Washington, D.C., that the federal government is forced to get involved in this. And this is where Jesse Plemons as FBI agent Tom White and Brendan Fraser, George of Jungle, and many others. He won an Oscar last year for The Whale, I think it was called, which I have not seen. And I see him in the stills for this movie, and I go, I don't think he put on the weight for that movie because he still looks pretty heavy. He's not the lithe, muscular guy from the 1980s and 90s anymore. But he's in this movie. Not that that matters. I'm just making a comment on it. But he is Hale's corrupt attorney, W.S. Hamilton, who expertly enters the picture, and he heats up the proceedings to the next level. And Killers of the Flower Moon is a story about trust and greed set in an ever-growing capitalist world. Nothing wrong with capitalism. until capitalism, like anything else, is used for greed, is used for murder, is used for taking what isn't yours. So Martin Scorsese's script, co-written by Eric Roth, it's detail-oriented. It takes its time as it meanders toward revealing the truth behind the hidden murders of the Osage. And by the way, I like a movie that takes its time setting the story for you. Now, the pacing is great in the movie. The editor makes sure everything zips by despite being 3.5 hours long. I like a good movie. A movie can be 3.5 hours long if it captivates and keeps my attention. I'm cool with that. Suspend my reality for a bit and let me watch. So looking at Scorsese's repertoire, it makes sense that he chose this story as greed and violence are go-to themes in his filmography. However, this true crime thriller goes deeper as the secret killings become methodical, and it's the kind of tale that's going to chill you to the bone when you think of the implications behind it and what depths people will go to for the sake of greed. Structurally, thematically, Martin Scorsese's movie begins on a balanced note. It's showing the perspective of both cultures in a well-organized and equal way with only one little mystery. But as the plot progresses, the focus shifts to Ernest's eyes as the FBI begins to investigate. You can feel the stylistic shift in the film's atmosphere as it becomes more of a familiar Scorsese flick, swooping crane shots, dynamic lighting, the crime angle and such. I mean, think of The Irishman, think of Gangs of New York. You get the idea. Though with all the sincerity, Scorsese is more interested in the interconnecting human relationships and the tragic story of the Osage Murders as a bottled-up example of greed-filled capitalist societies that breed violence. I don't think he's making a statement against capitalism. Capitalism is good, and we all know that. Martin Scorsese is a capitalist. All of the people in the film are capitalists. The film isn't about damning capitalism. It's about showing the greed that can come with some who misuse capitalism. Leonardo DiCaprio leads Scorsese's epic as the malleable Ernest Burkert. He plays the role with such truth and such intensity as he becomes more and more disgruntled, and you really start to see his full potential as he tries to make smart decisions, and that's no easy task to act. A permanent pit bull-like frown, emphasized by harsh, dramatic interrogation room lighting, becomes the norm for Ernest as the FBI comes knocking. Robert De Niro's shifty and manipulative Bill Hale pulls the strings. De Niro is doing the later stage Goodfellas, but without a New York City accent, essentially. It's Oklahoma in the 1920s. So Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio both act as co-leads alongside the wonderful Lily Gladstone, whose Molly is too trusting for her own good, yet extremely sharp around everyone except her husband. One can't help but feel attached to Gladstone and her awful predicament. And we suffer while watching the two male leads slowly kill off her entire family. And so in showing us the criminal perspective, Scorsese makes a huge impression on the audience by highlighting how mindless the murders were. Gladstone is the soul of this tragic, devastating piece. Everything is shown through her emotive expressions and looks, and often saying so much without speaking a word. Stylistically, says this reviewer, you can tell it's a Scorsese picture from the very beginning. Killers of the Flower Moon has his usual visual flair when partnering with now regular cinematographer Rodrigo Prieto and so on, if you pay attention to that stuff. So sweeping shots across the Osage vistas are elegant and stunning to look at. but the cinematographer at his best when Scorsese's in his element, in the courtroom or through the brutal murders. The visuals are thrilling when Scorsese breaks new personal ground when capturing the Osage culture. The killings are painfully blunt, occasionally cutting to the hits after they've taken place. They almost act as exclamation marks to further highlight the inhumanity and the sheer tragedy of the senseless acts at hand. Additionally, the production designer whips up an incredible lived-in Fairfax, Oklahoma, that elevates Petro's beautiful colored work. And this lived-in setting perfectly emulates the coldness of the most shocking scenes. And everything on screen is enticing and it's enthralling from start to finish. Now, this reviewer ends this by saying, there's no denying that Killers of the Flower Moon is a monumental picture for Martin Scorsese. This marks his second film in a row based on real-life killings. But now with the added pressure of representing a culture that he's unaffiliated with, Scorsese's care for portraying the Osage Nation, who were rightfully involved in the production, with respect and dignity, is vivid and deeply felt in his film. This is much more than just another mobster movie. Undoubtedly, it will have a serious impact on Native American audiences as Scorsese reanimates the Osage's tragic past as a learning lesson for America to reflect on. And to end on a positive note, there's some serious Oscar potential here as Leonardo DiCaprio delivers one of his best performances of all time, along with a top-notch Robert De Niro and an ace-empathy-filled performance from Lily Gladstone. And so that this film premiered at the 2023 Cannes Film Festival. And it releases in theaters October 20th of this year. So about 4 weeks from now. So that is the movie as it was seen from a reviewer. Now I want to look into the history a little bit, as after I read the reviews and after I looked at them, which I don't do a lot of, but I was very interested in this because of the topic of study, the Native American angle, the research into the Native American culture of Oklahoma of the 1920s. This is post-Indian Wars. This is post-expansion into the American West. This is when you're already coast to coast as a nation. So what's going on with these tribes now that they're on the reservations? You got a glimpse of some of this same kind of thing with the Yellowstone prequel series with Harrison Ford and excuse me, Helen Mirren, 1923, the building of the Yellowstone Ranch that Costner owns in the current day series. And it showed there was a big slice of that season spent time in the Native American schools, where girls were sent to Catholic schools and other schools to strip them of their heritage, really. And so you're seeing a lot of this, I think, in this story. This is going to be another look at that. Only this is made for cinema, not for TV. So I think it's going to be much harsher. It's going to be a lot darker. And it's going to be a rough ride, but one that I think is essential to knowing something about our past. We cannot, it's like I talked a while back about my daughter is starting to ask questions about the Holocaust. My son at 14 is just starting to go into a section at school about the Holocaust for the first time. And she was asking me questions, and it would be like wanting to know more about the Holocaust and watching Schindler's List. If you're going to make a comparison of watching a movie and the darkness of a movie, Schindler's List was dark. It was intense. for lack of a better word. It was, it dug your heart out and threw it on the floor. It was a rough film, but it was a good film and worthy of watching. I have a feeling that Killers of the Flower Moon is going to have a similar effect. Because it's going to look at what one family and one group of people did. This was not the United States government that did this. This was investors, capitalists, and people with money who did everything they could to take what was not theirs. And they did it by marrying in to families so they could own what they had and then killing them off. So I want to look at some of this true story now. In late May of 1921, 34-year-old Molly Burkett was summoned to a ravine on the Osage Reservation where she lived. Now, Molly Burkett was married to Ernest Burkett. She's a Native American Osage woman. And just for perspective, Leonardo DiCaprio is the actor who portrays her husband, Ernest Burkett. So Molly Burkett is summoned to a ravine on the Osage Reservation where she lived. A body had been found. Molly was told she could identify it, they asked. And she could. It was Molly's older sister, Anna Brown, who'd gone missing a week earlier. A bullet hole now marked the back of Anna's skull. And Anna wasn't the first family member Molly had recently lost. And she wouldn't be the last. In the 1920s, death ripped through the oil-rich Osage nation at a shocking rate. In some cases, seemed accidental, while others, like Anna's, clearly weren't. And even though her body was badly decomposed in the heat of the Oklahoma wasteland, I guess you could call it out there, they did find that she had been shot in the back of the head. And it would take the help of a nascent FBI to finally expose the orchestrator behind this years-long reign of terror on the Osage people. And the story of the Osage Murders is one of greed, of betrayal, and moral rot at the heart of white America. Now, I would say I use that phrase very carefully because I am not promoting racism by saying white America, but I am saying that it is the whites in America that perpetrated a lot of the atrocities on the Native American culture. But it must also be said, for perspective, when you have a people, the Native American peoples, that were being subjugated, that were being driven off their land, that were being killed and murdered, and whites were behind it, you also had many whites that stood for them and stood in defense of them. So when I say white Americans, I'm not saying that to the shame of white people. It's not a white problem. It was white people that perpetrated it, however. And it was also white people that helped resolve it and solve it and fix the problem. So it's the inspiration for the film, as we've talked about, Killers of the Flower Moon. And it's all about black gold, Texas tea. I learned that phrase from the Beverly Hillbillies when I was a kid. Old Jed was shooting at some food, and up through the ground came a bubbling crude. Oil, that is, black gold, Texas tea. And so black gold, white Americans displaced the Osage people twice. First from modern-day Missouri to modern-day Kansas in the early 1800s, 100 years earlier. And then again to modern-day Oklahoma later that century. And this new home, it's what's now Osage country, or Osage County, I'm sorry. And it was hilly and ill-suited to farming, which the migrants hoped would keep white settlers away. But Osage Chief James Bigheart and his fellow negotiators had also worked a crucial bit of protection into their allotment agreement with the U.S. government. Whatever mineral resources were found on the land, oil, coal, gold, etc., would belong to the tribe. So remember, this was happening at the height of the gold rush came not long after this, and their move to Oklahoma came after the gold rush. And so whatever mineral resources were found belonged to the tribe by treaty. Whatever's under the ground is ours. So basically, Osage individuals could freely lease out their plots, but prospectors had to pay royalties on any unearthed assets. And those funds went into a collective trust and were meted out among registered Osage people. And each person's share in the trust was called a head right, which couldn't be sold under any circumstances. It could, however, be inherited. Inherited. So the community already knew their reservation harbored some oil when the agreement was finalized in 1906, but they couldn't have known just how much. And by the early 1920s, according to Gran, the author of the book, oil had made the Osage population the richest people per capita in the entire world. Richer than you might think per capita than the Saudis today. And the trust netted some 30 million, or what would be more than $500 billion today, in just the year 1923 alone. And this all belonged to the Osage tribe. Now, many white Americans made various cunning and vile attempts to cheat the Osage people out of this wealth. They were the wealthiest people in the world, and in Oklahoma, most definitely at this time. And systemic corruption made possible through the federal government's guardianship law. And it's essentially stated that any Native American labeled incompetent by the Department of the Interior must be assigned a white guardian. It's the way it worked, to observe their finances. So they couldn't do anything financially, do banking, handle their money or anything without a white guardian if they were deemed by the Department of the Interior or the Indian agencies to be incapable of doing it for themselves. So these guardians would do things like sell products to their charges at jacked up prices and keep the change. Or they would purchase a house in their charge's name that was actually just for them. And the Indian Rights Association once called the guardianship program an orgy of graft and exploitation, which is basically what you saw with the Indian agents all through the 1800s and the Indian Wars. And in the midst of it all, dozens of Osage people were mysteriously dying. Not just dozens, up to 100 of them. From bullets to bombs, Wakanta Heumpa was born. That's the name. Wakanta Heumpa was born in December of 1886. For perspective, this is 10 years after the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And he grew up with 3 sisters in an Osage town called Gray Horse. As white people infiltrated the area, they began to replace the native residents' Osage names with white ones. Wakanta Heumpa became Molly, who was played by Lily Gladstone in the movie. And her sisters became Anna, Minnie, and Rita. So Wakanta, I don't know how to say it fast enough to make it sound right. Wakanta Heumpa became Molly, who the film focuses on, her and her family. And among the white settlers was Ernest Burkett, who's played by Leonardo DiCaprio. He was a poor Texas farmer's son who migrates to Osage territory in 1912 to live with his uncle, a rags-to-riches cattle rancher named William Hale. That's played by Robert De Niro. And Ernest met Molly while working as her driver. And by the way, the Osage tribe were so wealthy, they were hiring the white settlers and the white inhabitants of the town as servants, butlers, drivers, and so on. And he was working for Molly as her driver, and the two soon struck up a courtship. And he charmed her by learning the Osage language and caring for her when her diabetes flared up. And they married in 1917. And over the next 4 years, the couple welcomed 2 children and buried Molly's sister, Minnie, who passed away at age 27 from what was identified only as a wasting illness. The siblings' mother, Lizzie, died of a similar illness just 2 months after Anna's death in 1921. And by this point, the official investigation into Anna's murder and that of a 30-year-old Osage man, Charlie Whitehorn, also shot in May of 1921, had stalled. The Burketts did have a powerful ally in Hale, known as the King of the Osage Hills. And it was Hale whose endorsements decided elections, and Hale who readily volunteered to pay people's medical bills. So it was Hale who, at Molly's request, hired a private detective. But months turned to years, and the Osage death count rose above 20 with no break in the case. Now, keep in mind, you're in a small town in Oklahoma in the 1920s, and 20 members of the Osage tribe have been murdered. Some died with suspicious circumstances, suspected to be murder. And the Osage count rose up to 20 over a couple of years. And imagine that if it was around you in your town, not talking about a big city, but your town. 20 people from basically the same heritage group are all ending up dead. And so many of the victims were believed to have been poisoned, including a man named Joe Bates, who was the father of 6. He was a rodeo cowboy, or also a rodeo cowboy, William Stepson, and George Bigheart, nephew of the late James Bigheart. Henry Rowan, a close friend of Hale's, was shot to death. White people who tried to investigate the crimes in earnest were also assassinated. Oilman Barney McBride was brutally battered and stabbed to death, and lawyer W.W. Vaughn was flung off a train and broke his neck and died. In March of 1923, Molly's family suffered yet another shattering blow. Someone bombed the house of Rita and her sister Rita and her husband, Bill Smith, who was Minnie's widower, killing them both along with their housekeeper, who was white. And Bill had been working to solve the murders for nearly 2 years and had recently intimated that he believed he was nearing the truth. And then their house was blown up. Too long had local officials and private citizens failed to put an end to the bloodshed, so the Osage people asked the federal government to come on board, to intervene. Now, headright hunting. Remember what headrighting was? This was becoming marrying into the family. So you could, in essence, inherit the land. So Tom White was a 6'4" Stetson-wearing Texan who ran the Houston field office of J. Edgar Hoover's Bureau of Investigation. That was a precursor to the FBI. And at Hoover's behest, he relocated to the Oklahoma City office in July of 1925 and recruited a unit of agents to investigate these murders. They were too suspicious. So White overlooked qualifications like education level and the administrative proficiency in favor of hiring men who'd be most believable as members of the community. A New Mexican ex-sheriff and former Texas Ranger, assumed identities as ranchers. A former insurance salesman started hawking legitimate insurance policies in the area. And John Wren, who was indeed part Ute, masqueraded as a Native American medicine man. And other members of the team followed leads without going undercover. And so as intel poured in 1925, White realized that all roads seemingly led to one person, William K. Hale. This is the De Niro character in the movie. Pike, the private investigator assigned to Anna's case, and you can already see how convoluted this starts to get. The PI that was assigned to her case alleged that Hale had actually hired him to cement an alibi for Ernest's brother, Brian Burkett, who was with Anna the night she died. And according to Pike, Ernest himself, that's the DiCaprio character, had attended some of those meetings with Hale. Agents also learned that Hale had acquired, through fudged reports and fraudulent debt claims, a $25,000 insurance policy on his friend Henry Rowan shortly before his death. $25,000 back then was a lot more than it seems today. A portrait of Hale's intricate plot began to emerge. He had apparently mobilized an entire network of outlaws to carry out all of these killings. Then he systematically had them killed. Had them killed too. The murderers killed, lest they incriminate him. And his motive for murdering Molly's family members in particular was ready-made. After all, it was Hale who stood to gain untold wealth for life. If Ernest, this is the DiCaprio character, his most pliable puppet, inherited all the head rights from Molly's family. But that would only happen if all of Molly's sisters were dead and Molly herself died. Meanwhile, Molly was dying. So her vigil is pretty astounding. In the 2 or so years since the bombing of the house, her sister's house, Molly had withdrawn from society. Her health worsened. And of course, their whole community, Osage community, is realizing somebody's killing us all off. And her health worsened, and purportedly due to her diabetes. And local doctors made home visits to administer her insulin. But in late 1925, Molly smuggled a message to her priest, conveying worries that she was being poisoned. So Molly's peril put pressure on White to accelerate arrests. And in early of January 1926, he brought in Ernest, her husband, who, when presented with a confession from one of the outlaws involved in the crimes, broke like a dam. Ernest outed a thief named Asa Kirby as the planter of the bomb. Another thief named John Ramsey as Rowan's killer, and bootlegger Kelsey Morrison, a slippery former bureau informant, as Anna's. And behind every scheme was Hale, with Ernest as the occasional intermediary. The one thing Ernest claimed to be ignorant of was any campaign to poison his wife, Molly. And the doctors maintained their innocence too. Fortunately, she regained her health after authorities had transported her to a hospital outside of the county. And all of a sudden, she mysteriously starts becoming better with insulin that's not being administered by these doctors. So convictions initially proved very elusive in all of this. In March of 1926, Hale and Ramsey attended a hearing as defendants in the bombing murders. Kirby had died in a bank robbery that Hale likely made sure would go wrong. But Hale and his lawyers coerced Ernest, the prosecution's would-be star witness, into testifying for the defense instead. He proceeded to categorically deny every detail in his previous confession. So prosecutors pivoted from that case and scheduled a trial for Ernest, who was indicted as a co-conspirator in the bomb plot. Then tragedy struck during that trial. In early June, the Burkett's youngest daughter, Anna, died. So shortly after her funeral, Ernest told prosecutors he was tired of lying. He changed his not guilty plea to guilty and confessed on the stand that, yes, he had told Ramsey to give Kirby the go-ahead to plant the bomb. I feel in my heart that I did it because I was requested to do it by Hale, who is my uncle, Ernest said. The jury found him guilty, sentenced him to life in prison with hard labor. Hale and Ramsey's first trial for Rowan's murder that summer ended in a hung jury, probably due to bribery. But the prosecution eventually obtained a conviction for first-degree murder after a retrial in October. Both defendants received life sentences. The following year, Brian Burkett was granted immunity in return for helping put Morrison away for Anna's murder. And one constant in every courtroom was Molly, as alert as she was stoic. By the time Morrison was convicted of Anna's murder, Molly could no longer even look at her husband, Ernest. Gann wrote that in his book. She soon divorced him, and whenever her husband's name was mentioned, she recoiled in horror. Can you find the wolves in this picture? You'll see that phrase in the trailer if you watch it. Molly got married again to a man named John Cobb in 1928 and lived peacefully until her death at age 50 in 1937. Ernest was released on parole mere months after Molly's passing, though he landed back in prison, this time for robbery in 1941. He was paroled in 1959 and eventually settled in a trailer on the outskirts of Osage Territory, where he remained until his death in 1986. And Hale was released in 1947, and he died in Arizona in 1962. So the king of the Osage Hills never outright confessed to his crimes. This is Hale. In fact, he referred to himself as the king of the Osage Hills, by the way. We don't even know how many crimes and murders he actually committed. What we do know is that the Reign of Terror wasn't the work of a lone mastermind. And over the course of his research, Gran, who wrote the book, learned about Osage murders that took place years before Anna's death and years after Hale went to prison. Archival records revealed a suspiciously high number of Osage wards who died while under guardianship of white people because they weren't allowed to do their own bookkeeping, their own financial matters. They had to be appointed a white person to do that for them. And the Bureau reports shed light on how doctors would poison Osage people to make their deaths seem accidental. And some historians have estimated the era's casualties to be the era, not areas, the era, E-R-A, the era's casualties in Osage County to be in the hundreds. All for wanting the land and being able to legally inherit the oil rights. In other words, Hale and Ernest were only the exception in that they, unlike all the other spouses and the sworn protectors and self-proclaimed friends of the Osage, they were the only ones who got caught out of the hundreds of deaths. So, folks, that is in brief, believe it or not, that's in brief, the story of the killers of the Flower Moon, the Osage Murders in Oklahoma, back in the 1920s. And this shows you the degree to which some of these greedy people would go in order to get the land of these people, in order to end up in the long run as the inheritors of that property. Today, the Osage Nation murders are largely thought to have been the case that helped birth the FBI and modern law enforcement, no matter what you think of all the corruption that's gone on in recent years, which relies on extensive investigations, undercover operations, and the use of informants to crack complex criminal cases. And though the murders began over a century ago, they still echo in the lives and the finances of the Osage people. And today, the Osage Nation notes on its website approximately 26% of Osage head rights remain in non-Osage hands and can be passed on to non-Osage entities at will. And though the Killers of the Flower Moon looks at long past events, the nation writes, "We are not relics." The Osage Nation is thriving. Our reservation in Northwest Oklahoma, on our reservation in Northwest Oklahoma, we're a people of strength, a people of hope, and a people of passion, they write, honoring the stories of the past and building the world of the future. Think of it this way. They didn't have much option at the time because the laws all worked against them. And they're still suffering from some of that today. And we'll talk about this some more if you'd like in the Captain's Cabin, which we are at the end of the show for the radio audience. We got to get out of here, but stick around, everybody else, in the chat room on my YouTube channel. And if you're listening on the radio, come over to the YouTube and join us. And for now, all of you on radio, live long and prosper.
Join us every weeknight at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The Intrepid radio program. A Scotty Roberts program.
Hey folks, this is Scotty Roberts, and this is the Intrepid radio broadcast. I've been broadcasting for about 20 years now, covering such topics as science, politics, the paranormal, weird science, weird world history, archaeology, and the paranormal. Everything from ghosts to cryptids to creepy things that go bump in the night. So every week I bring you 3 new episodes. Come and join my channel and also be a patron to this site. So see the details below, and we'll see you here. Well, everyone, welcome back to the Captain's Cabin. This is our after show. This is not the formal show. It's time where we can break down, be a little more casual, a little less formal. We are off the radio and just broadcasting over on YouTube and over on our Facebook channel and over on Patreon and a couple of different places where this show dispenses. And so welcome back to the after show. And might I add, and avast, because it's the Captain's Cabin. And I do have to remind you all that it was named thusly by you, the listeners, the Captain's Cabin. God, how long ago did we do that? A year ago? 2 years ago? I don't remember how long we've been doing the cabin, but it's been around for a while. Did we do this before I went to Louisiana with Sam and worked? That would have been January of 2020 to 2020 or 2021. I don't remember. Somewhere in there. So welcome back, everybody. And everybody who's here, I appreciate your being here. I see many of you, Field Guy and Unleashed Jeremy Hansen is here. And who else have we got? We got, just looking through our list here, we got Ken Ballos. Kenny, KB Ballos, was not afeared to come in here tonight. He's got morning coffee with KB every morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Central Standard Time, 6 a.m. for those of you out on the left coast. And you can find him on his Facebook page, broadcasting through Facebook. One of these days, we'll get him bumped up to what I'm using here, which is StreamYard. And he'll be able to bring in, hopefully, a broader audience. And Kenny, it's easy. We got to get you going on it. Valerie, good to see you here. Glad you made it in. Claudette, great to see you tonight. Steve Clark, thanks for being here. And you said, one of the last comments, you said, thank you, Scotty, for bringing some truth of the hidden history of the United States of America. And you're welcome. And I think what we have to keep in perspective is this isn't all of the United States that acted this way. But this was certainly a community of people that acted this way. And there were certainly unscrupulous criminal minds that were behind all of this. Obviously, many of us want to be involved in business to make a living, maybe even get ahead financially. But I think there's very few of us that really would go out of our way to cheat somebody, to commit crimes in order to get there, or to kill off whole families and whole nations of people. So Jeremy Hansen said in the South, they call that marrying well. Maybe so. And let's see, who else was here tonight? Elvis. Elvis is in the building. Good to see you, Elvis. Glad you made it in here tonight. And I'm just scrolling through. Michelle Canham Freedom is here. Good to see you, Michelle. I'm glad you're here. And who else we got? Oh, I see a lot of comments I missed because I was so into wanting to get the information out. I wasn't always glancing back at the chat room. So maybe we can address some of that here in the Captain's Cabin, if you so desire. And you can all call in. The link to call in to the Captain's Cabin, it's, of course, in the description over on the YouTube channel. Or you can just, here, I'll paste it in right here. You can copy that link and paste it into your browser window, and that will get you here. Grumpy Stack was here. The Grumpy Grandpa Zen Run Show. The Grumpy Grandpa Zen Run Show. Zen Run or Zan Run? Don't know. A lot of bald white men walking around. Yeah, I'll bet you. He says. And Project Skyfalls was here earlier. I hope you're still here and still listening. And Elderberry was here. Land of the Six Bulls. Neosho, Land of Cool, Clear Water. They were called, wasn't the Osage, the original name, have something to do with the people of the Middle Waters or something like that? in between the waters, or I can't remember where they originally came from. Michael Brewer is here, Viking Off-Roading, and welcome to the program. And Rendell Flagg is here. And I'm just going through the list of who made it in here tonight and came into the chat room. And I think that's about everybody. If I missed you, didn't say hello, it's not for any other reason than I just missed you. Could be a glasses thing. Steve Clark says, Scotty, there's a lot of hidden history throughout this nation, as I've been doing a little research into this kind of stuff. Yeah, that's the truth. There's a lot of things that people just don't know that went on. And we can't learn them all. We don't know them all. We probably never will. How much happened that was maybe even between individuals or individual landowners or someone in a town against somebody else in a town or whole towns or whatever it might be. There's so much hidden history out there that is not like the formal history of our country. So it never makes it into a book. It never makes it into. That's why guys like Gahn, who wrote the Killers of the Flower Moon, are important because they grab history that we don't know about and they research it out and they write about it. It's like D. Brown in writing Bury My Hearted Wounded Knee was writing something we didn't know about, and that was the Native American perspective of the conquering of the American West. I even look into, and I know you can go beyond American history, obviously, every little bit of history that's out there. I look at Egyptian history. There's things we don't know. I was describing to my son last night. I woke up in the middle of the night, about 1:30. It's not the middle of the night, 1:30, 2 o'clock, because I'd had the TV on when I went to sleep. And we usually do. We have a TV that we're watching something and we fall off to sleep. But it went off suddenly. It just went off. And it was suddenly quiet in our bedroom. And I opened my eyes, the TV's off. I thought, well, what's going on? And TV wasn't working. And I couldn't get anything. Internet not connected. So I checked the modem box and all that. It's 1:30. I could have just turned over and gone to sleep. Left it for morning, but I thought, what's wrong with my internet? I have to be working on the internet in the morning. And sure enough, the internet was off and it wasn't back on until about 7:30, 8 o'clock this morning. It was fine. But the point being, I was awake. But in going to sleep, I was watching a show, and I must have woken up just before that because the show went off. And I thought, oh, where'd the show go? And it's a show that had Joanne Fletcher, who, if you watch any of the historical documentaries on Egypt, you'll see her in a lot of History Channel or History Hit TV series done over the last 10 years or so. She's the redhead, kind of fuzzy redhead with always wears black blousey clothes in Egypt. And she's a doctorate of Egyptology, does some fascinating shows. Well, she was part of a show that I'd never seen before last night. And it was a show about the forensics of some of the many, many mummies that they have in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, that they have all across Europe, some of the big museums. And it's interesting stuff, a lot of forensics that they had, that they're now being able to engage in, that they didn't have 100 and 200 years ago when they first found some of these mummies. For instance, the one I was watching was about a woman, beautiful, ornate casket, Egyptian style, things close to 3,000 years old, 2,500 years old, beautifully hand-painted casket, but it had never been opened. The seals were never broken. And the reason they hadn't opened it, it was found in 1821, which is, what is that? That's 200 years ago. And in 1821, they had damaged a little bit at the foot, and they didn't dare open it for fear that they would damage the entire casket, which was covered in these beautiful hand-painted hieroglyphics. So they left it, and it was in storage. And so they pulled that out, and they said, we have no idea who's inside this, other than the hieroglyphics tell us it was this woman by this name. We don't know anything about her. We don't know where she fits into history, other than the dating of how the hieroglyphics were done and all of that stuff. So they were able to now, with modern technology, take this casket and give it a CT scan. And they were able to see her face. And in the segments, you know how the MRIs do, the CT scans. And so they rebuilt her face. And they started with the skeletal structure. And digitally, because they didn't have any physical evidence, they had no skull, nothing. It's all inside, sealed inside this casket. And they were able to, with her skeleton that they took on the CT scans, do exactly what they do in forensics when they rebuild facial structures from actual skulls. And they were able to rebuild this woman's face. And you could see what she looked like. Then they used, stereotypes. And stereotypes, probably not the right word, but like hairstyles. It would go to about the year the era that this would have come from, what kind of hairstyle did the women wear, so on. Was she of royal birth? They could tell by her teeth that she was of higher nobility because her teeth weren't worn. They ate better food. And so they found the face. And then they went in to the CT scan and said, now, this is the face built off the skull. Let's see what she looks like right now. And when they built the CT scan off of the CT scans, her face was badly decomposed, almost hideously unrecognizable. Whereas some Egyptian skeletons and some bodies you see that are amazingly preserved. And so what they were finding is they're going through the whole CT scan, the whole body. They said this is a botched, rushed embalming job. It was rushed, then she was put in the casket and buried. But then they found out something else. The name that was painted on the outside of the casket in hieroglyphs was, there was something about it that wasn't right. And the more they examined it, they said the hieroglyphics used, and they could see little bits and pieces were changed. Meaning the name had been painted on, but then somebody had changed something about the name. And so it went from something like, it was very subtle, but it changed the whole meaning of her name to mean male instead of female. It had a male connotation, but the original name would have been female. So they're finding out this is female name. Somebody not only botched the embalming job, but they also deliberately changed the name on the outside of the casket. And so this is starting to build some evidence of something. Then they find there is an incision in the abdomen below the ribs. And there's always an incision down there that they make to remove the organs and things like that for embalming. And that is a very clean, narrow cut. It's cut. And then the embalmers meticulously stitch this back up. So you can hardly tell it was ever done. But in the CT scan, you could tell that they could find that. They located that. But then there's a wound on the other side of her abdomen that is grotesque. It's deep. It's very cutting and twisted. And so they worked out this whole theory of this woman, and there were no cuts or anything showing on her arms, but she had this big knife wound, almost a short sword wound in her lower stomach. And as they looked at it, the wound went through the intestines and through I think it's through the stomach and into the liver. And I think that's the order it was. And it pierced the liver, but it was twisted. So the liver had been ripped around, which they said would have caused almost instantaneous, excruciatingly painful death. And if it didn't take minutes, it would have been, or if it didn't take, there was actually a military medical or medic. He was a doctor in the field during war, and he is now working in forensics. He said if she didn't die almost instantaneously, excruciatingly painful, she would have died within minutes itself. Not more than 2 or 3 minutes, he said. And so they said the reason she didn't have any cuts or anything showing on any part of her form, like trying to fight this off, they said the theory they worked out was that somebody had come up from behind her, grabbed her like this. Her hands went up, and as her hands go up, as you would any attacker, they slit the dagger into her gut, ripped it around, pulled it out, dropped her to the floor. She's dead in moments. Now, so what they're figuring, what they found out through all the forensics being not just the physical attributes of the body, which they could only determine through the CT scans, but through all the surrounding information, the embalming itself being shoddy. They found that her throat during embalming, they always left I think it was the tongue intact to the throat, this area here, because the religious belief was one that when you went into the afterlife, you needed your throat, your vocal box, vocal cords, your tongue to express, to speak to the gods your name and who you were and what your deeds were. This was part of their religion. And this had all been removed. So as the forensic scientist, the Egyptologist, Joanne Fletcher, stated, she said, not only was this woman, they found she was noble, so she was somebody of noble birth, somebody probably connected to the royal family. Somebody didn't like her at all. They had her not only physically assassinated and murdered, they murdered her spiritually by removing her ability to speak her name in the afterlife, which was afterlife murder in their belief system. Then they also murdered her by stealing her name from the external or the exterior of the casket. So this woman was triple murdered. Somebody did not like her. And there's nothing about her story that they were able to uncover other than these tidbits about her forensics. So here is this casket that's been sitting for 200 years in a museum back room. I don't know if they had it on display or not because of the beauty of the casket. I think they had it on display because they had the name, but the name was wrong. And so now they've restored through forensic her name. They've restored in her what would have been her spirituality, her religion, her ability to speak her name in the afterlife. And they restored who she was. So to me, this is all incredibly interesting. Now there's this whole series they have. I don't even know what it's called. You can look it up. I was watching it on YouTube. Something with Joanne Fletcher, Dr. Joanne Fletcher. And she's one of the scientists that's involved in the forensics. And it's a show about the forensics of Egyptian mummies that they couldn't name, that they couldn't figure out who they were, what they were, where they were from, and so on. I found that very interesting. So all of that to me ties into the study. This is what makes it so interesting to me to study history. Would these mummies have been left unknown? And And you have to ask the question. Some people might go, who cares? Who cares who these people were? Maybe nobody. Maybe nobody except a historian or a scholar. But what if there was something to their religion, something to their spirituality that was important for that name to be spoken? I have often said, because it's been a topic of great controversy, why did Moses, when he wrote about the Exodus, wrote about the Pharaoh, wrote about the book of Genesis, all the interactions with the pharaohs and so on, why did he never name them? If this was a book of history, faith mixed with history, the history of the Jews, why did he not name these people? Was it unimportant in history to know who these people were? Because there were certainly names throughout the Old Testament of other pharaohs, Shishak or Shishunk, who attacked Israel after the founding of the land. There were other pharaohs mentioned. Merneptah, I think, was mentioned. So there are other historical figures named. Why did Moses, in his writings, delete the names of the pharaohs? There is a theory that perhaps Moses omitted those names so those names would not be spoken and they would not be given eternal life through any help of his own. There's some thought of that. So I'm curious about that. Why do you think Moses didn't name the pharaohs? Another theory was that, well, because all those original books were lost during the Babylonian captivity, and that it was, remember, the 72 rabbis who went to Ptolemy II, the descendant of Ptolemy, who was one of Alexander the Great's generals who inherited and became the Pharaoh of Egypt. These 72 rabbis went and said, after all the captivities, they went to Egypt, to the Library of Alexandria, the world's storehouse of knowledge, and asked for permission of Ptolemy II, the Pharaoh of Egypt, the Grecian Pharaoh of Egypt, if they could go and rebuild the ancient documents and scriptures of the Jewish people, which would have been in the Library of Alexandria. And they spent a number of years there doing that. And that the document that they produced was the Septuagint, or the Septuaginta, however you want to say it, in about 400 to 500 years before the time of Christ. And what they recreated was the Old Testament scriptures. And they did this from the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of Moses, were all learned and recited over the centuries. Well, for 1,000 years, from the time of Moses to the time that they went to the Library of Alexandria, through all the captivities, all the monarchy, all of this. And so they rebuilt these books. That's why you'll hear critics say, well, these books only date to 400, 500 BC. That's like the book of Enoch, only dates to about 400 BCE. So it's a fraud. Well, why is it a fraud when all the books of the Bible basically date to that time period? Because that's when they were restructured, rewritten, based on oral tradition, based on the works that were kept at the Library of Alexandria. So interesting stuff. Did they omit the names of the pharaohs in Moses' books? Would they have put them in there if Moses had originally put them in? So did Moses, again, not originally put the names in? And why? Was it to, and about the closest you get to Moses naming anybody in the pharaonic house in the Old Testament, in the books of Moses, was when he called the princess of Egypt who found him in the basket in the Nile. He refers to her as Pharaoh's daughter. There were only 2 women up to that point who bore that title. That was a title. Pharaoh's daughter. It was not just a descriptor. The farmer's daughter. No, it was Pharaoh's daughter was a title. Hatshepsut was one of them. Matkare, whose regnal name was Hatshepsut, who I've talked about many times, who was affiliated with this guy back over my shoulder, this bust of Senenmut. She rose him to power, and that's who I believe was Moses. So this woman is that the one homage that Moses gives to an Egyptian without actually giving us the name. Pharaoh's daughter. There's only 2 people that bore that title up to that point. Hatshepsut being one of them. So, interesting stuff. Anyway, there you go. That's all for free. That came off of our studies of the Osage. This is why I like history. History opens the door. It sheds light on things so we can know more about them. We've got Michael Brewer here is hanging in the wings. Obviously dying to say something. Let's bring him in. Hey, Michael. How you doing?
Not much. I was going to check on you to make sure you're still kicking.
I'm still kicking.
Yeah, it's been a day, but
yeah.
But I sat down for a minute to finish up some schoolwork, and you was on, and I always listen to you in the background while I'm doing it. And
all right.
But like I said, usually I'm catching the end of it anymore. But he's talking about like little cliques and people kind of going together, and they had the whole Lincoln County wars,
right?
Because it was too store much. Oh, you can't sell stuff to these people. That's my job to take their money. And it went back to greed and John Tunstall and all of that, and and you had a lot of people come out of that was really, really notable, like Billy the Kid and what was it? It was the other Doc, whatever. They made like 3 movies about it.
Doc Holliday?
No, Doc. Remember Chavez? It was Chavez Doc. And there's one they actually called. He's like Doc Brewer or something other, because I remember his name because it's the same as mine. And
I'm not thinking of who that is.
There's but Uncle he's John, in the original.
Let's bring him in. Uncle John.
Hello, guys.
No, but I always remember that. And but that started over somebody wanting to just Henry. Yeah, that was another one. Yeah. But yeah, that was like a big, just because somebody wanted to set up and do store frontage, and he's like, no. But then that's like Wyatt Earp and the Cowboys. The Earps moved and set up shop. Then you had the Cowboys, part of a different little clique that was there together, and we all know how that turned out.
Yep, we do.
And
that whole thing, it's so funny when you think about that. The OK Corral, the whole thing they said lasted about 20 seconds.
Yeah, 20 seconds. It made a 3-hour movie. 3-hour, and
look at the impact that's made on our historical
accuracies.
What do you want to call it? Our historical story.
You know what a guy told me one time when I took land warfare, laws of land warfare or something. He said, just so you remember, winners write the history books.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, okay.
But then again, and when the losers write it, after we've had enough of the winner's story, and we find out there's another story. Like D. Brown, who wrote Bury My Hearted Wounded Knee.
Yeah.
They were the losers.
Oh, yeah.
They were the Indians. They were the Native Americans who were suppressed, who were driven onto reservations, who had everything taken away, even their culture, their heritage, their language, everything taken away. And yet you've got a guy 100 years later named D. Brown. When he wrote this book, not even 100 years later, 60, 70, 80 years later, writes a book about it from the Native American perspective. And it gives you a whole different outlook on what the winners wrote. So
the soldiers did not want to press the attack that day. They said, we already disarmed them.
Yeah.
And the government agent said, I'll keep replacing the commander until we have someone who will lead and the government ordered the assault.
Yeah. That's like Vietnam. What
It's
was
a
it?
black day in our history.
Yeah, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. They said, "Oh, we had a warship that got attacked," and there wasn't even a warship at the Gulf of Tonkin. So if the powers to be want a war, they'll find a way to make a war. That they will. And people says it's conspiracy. I said it ain't conspiracy. It's history. It's far from it. And that's what I said. And I look back. My time I spent in Iraq and stuff like that. People have destroyed so much history that you could kind of, I always said part archaeologist, part detective. You know what I'm saying? You got to be able to put the pieces together, like the lady in the coffin. You know what I'm saying? Who does she make so mad? Like you said, they wanted to
wanted to assassinate her that way.
Yeah, triple homicide.
And we have no idea who did that to her.
No, and
or why. All we know is that it was done to her.
Yeah,
and so she really pissed somebody off somewhere.
Yeah, she about like what was it I was thinking about? You said something that and it's about somebody's name or something another, and it reminded me of like what The Rock used to do on WD. He'd say, "Oh, what's your name? Oh, it doesn't matter." You know what I'm saying? It doesn't matter what and I'm like, wow. But that popped in my head there. I was feeling like I said, it's been a day. But
Jeremy says, I have a friend here in Missouri that searches caves for Osage artifacts. He has everything: pottery, game pieces, etc. He said, I thought it was cool. Tools, utensils, game pieces, religious, etc. Steve Clark, didn't you know somebody, or don't you have some artifacts? Something was it you that told me that, Steve? I can't remember.
What got me into history? What was it? There was one place out next to the Grand Canyon where the people lived up on the cliffs, and they had all these ladders, and they dug out a hole. It looked like a whole high-rise apartment building.
Right. The Pueblo.
And one day they just up and said, look, we don't like living here, and left. And
what would we know today if the priests had not ordered the Spanish conquistadors to burn all of the libraries of the Aztecs?
Amen. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They said, not only do we want to conquer them physically, but we will conquer them spiritually. Everybody needs to be a Catholic.
We will wipe out any history of them ever existing.
Yep. And they meant it. And now they're uncovering whole cities through South and Central America.
Yeah.
Because there was one explorer, I can't remember his name. I'm not as good as you are, Scotty. I can't remember the names off the top of my head. But he was like there 300 years. Yeah, and okay, I'll take my hint. Here's shameless plug. If you do not have your copy yet of
that's not what I meant.
ScottyRoberts.com or what is it? Scotty.
Oh, I'm not pushing that right now, but you can get that in an audiobook as well.
Yeah, that's it. No, that's the reason I keep it here, because I figure if I'm not good for anything else, Scotty, I'm good for a cheap laugh and a shameless plug.
There you go. That's what I was just saying about you recently.
Yeah.
It's always good for a cheap laugh and a shameless plug.
And, I was watching a thing with Johnny Carson and Steve Martin the other day. Them guys could play off each other well.
Oh yeah.
Yes, man. And you know what I'm saying? And they could push each other's agenda without ever hardly saying a word between them. And it was just amazing.
Steve said,
I'm so old, I remember the whipped cream fight on Carson.
Yeah, so I was going to say. I was going to say. I bet he remembers it when it was still.
I remember having seen video of it.
But the funniest thing that ever happened on Carson, it was one of the Gabor sisters that came in, and she had this big old fancy cat on her lap. He sat there and
that's awesome, Steve. By the way,
and she's sitting there petting this cat the whole time, and Johnny would sit there and smoke. Back when you could smoke on TV. And
right on TV.
And she looked over and she said, how'd you like to pet my pussy? He said, I like it just fine if you move that damn cat. And that about caused him to lose his whole show. And they, what was it? Don Knotts. Wasn't Don Knotts. It was the guy who did wasn't McHale's Navy. It was whatever, but he was sitting in for Johnny, and he broke his cigarette box. And Johnny came back from vacation, and his studio here where they did the Tonight Show, Don Rickles.
Yeah.
And
Mr. Warmth.
Yeah. And so So back, back then in the 50s or whatever, or the 60s, when you went to take a TV camera with you and a microphone, you had a procession and a parade of people because it was big, heavy equipment. He told him, he said, wait a minute. He said, we're going to deal with this right now or I'm not doing the show. He gets up, takes his broken cigarette box, drags this TV camera, the big thing looks like the size of my truck. And he goes over there and he confronts him on a live set about, hey, he's an asshole, broke my cigarette box. And Don said, oh, they're like, and they said, come to find out, Johnny was really pissed because somebody had brought him the cigarette box because that's where he kept all his cigarettes. And during the show, that's where he, had a lighter on and all that. And Don had broke the top of the box. If you get a chance to look it up on YouTube, it is funny.
I'll have to look that up.
But the reason, and the Tonight Show was such a big thing in there. And I just talked to my daughter earlier. Like I said, we're dealing with some things with my dad, trying to sort everything out because it's getting to the point where it's going to have to make a decision for burial and all that because the news we got ain't good. And she's talking about going through my baby pictures. I said, Shelby, I already know. I said, I'm so goddamn old that some of my baby pictures are in black and white. I said, I get it. And they are, you know what I'm saying? Old and
All
Mills.
of my baby pictures are in black and white.
I said some of them are in black and white. And I was like,
all of mine are.
Yeah.
How old are you, Uncle
Except
Don?
the ones that were hand oiled.
The one that the guy sat there and had made him set you there and painted it in with whatever. Yeah. Hey, Lisa one drawed on what was it? They had the damn knobs, the sketchy thing, the etch or whatever. Yeah. Hey, if they didn't draw it right, you just shuck it, and you just did
Right.
it over. But no, but we have so much history in our country and the world that people have tried to cover up over the years because they don't like the narrative of it.
Sure.
Like I said, to stay fairly politically neutral tonight because I still got to write papers and I don't need that cloud in my mind because it falls out of my head and into my fingers. The same way with the statues, you know what I'm saying? Oh, we got to take these down. It never happened. And they're defacing our history like they defaced her coffin that she was buried in. You know, because she had pissed somebody off and somebody had become offended even back in. So that tells me there's Kevin's and Karen's even back in the day. But
sure.
There were two things that I recall being raised on, and I think every kid was my age. Sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt you.
Right.
And the other one was the golden rule.
Yep.
Do to them before they do to you.
And we like to think to think the good old days abided by that, but they didn't.
No.
But it was what they tried to teach.
It's what we try to teach. It's the principles that we try to teach. But people have obviously been doing for millennia what they're doing now.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing.
You don't like it covered up. Yeah.
Now it's an individual sport.
Oh yeah.
Or a team sport.
Right.
In this whole keyboard warrior stuff. That looks like Dave Diaz. Oh, that's Uncle Dave. Looks like I think it's the Dave I know. But it don't look like he's picture though. Because that's a Dave Diaz too. But anyway. But no, it's like, you go out, used to, and I told somebody this, somebody said something online I didn't like. I'm going to respond to them. In our day, if somebody said something you didn't like, you got off at the wrong bus stop, you beat your ass, then you walked home.
There was that. Hey, David.
Yeah, he said, yes, David it's Diaz. Me.
It's me, he says.
Come on in.
Yes.
Yeah, come on in.
It's me, says David Diaz. Good to see you, David.
Hey, remember, damn it, Dave. Because we had Uncle Dave, then we had damn it, Dave. Or
is Dave Diaz, damn it, Dave?
Damn it, Dave, or fucking Dave, or something other. Remember, we had him on the morning show when me and you was doing the coffee for KB.
I don't recall.
Out of Las Vegas.
I don't recall. Oh, is that you, David? Are you out of Las Vegas?
Yeah, he said send an invite. You go down to the bottom of the page. In more, click on more, and there'll be a StreamYard link. You click on it, and when you click on it, close your YouTube page on your laptop.
Good night, Dave, or good night, Ken. He says, great show. We'll see you in the morning, brother.
Yeah, like I
Kinda
said,
early
hey, I couldn't get
appointment.
on Wendy's live last night, so it just ain't KB's I couldn't get on. I tried to get on her Facebook when she's getting everybody an update that she wasn't feeling well for Robertson Robinson. She's like, "Oh, come on." I was like, "I'm trying." Every time I hit the button, it resets my phone. So it just ain't KB. Facebook hates me. But yeah. Oh, he said fucking Dave. Yeah, that's it. I got it wrong. It's been a long day. But yeah, if you go in, there is a link. Scotty might be able to post it in the comments, but like I said, after you copy the link, close your YouTube page or you will get feedback. It took me 2 weeks to figure out why I couldn't get on any of them.
Where are you looking? You want me to post a link for what?
For the StreamYard. Because he's like sent an invite.
Oh, yeah. If you want to come over here and be part of the show, you can call into the show at this link.
Yeah, but you have
see.
to close YouTube after you open it or not get horrific feedback. Horrific.
Yeah.
We could use some more scintillating people.
Yeah.
Put YouTube on silent or shut that window.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll get feedback coming into the show.
Remember, it took me like 3 weeks to figure out why I kept hearing you like in my ear and on my laptop. And I'm
Right.
like, what the hell? And I couldn't. I took my whole network down because that's what I do. I was like, yeah, I will find the issue. And at the end of the day, it was the same thing it always is.
Yes.
End user error. Yeah.
I went to headphones.
Yeah, headphones.
Yeah.
I bought me a mic. If it's
Right
green,
on.
you're on. And like I
I
said,
got me a mic.
Yeah, he said I got me a
It's
mic.
time for a new mic. I've had this mic for 10 years maybe.
Oh yeah, I got a backup. Oh well, no, it's all tangled up, but I got a backup just in
I
case.
did get a new basket for it here. A new cage.
Yeah,
a couple of months back.
No, I might do that if I ever get my studio finished. I want to try to get to one like Scotty, but I'm gonna hang it down here from the ceiling like the old whatever they used to have it, and they say, "Hey, that man will give you $5 hanging to his can." Remember that old brother were out there? Uncle John remembers.
I still have to put up my cans from Dave. Oh, here's Dave Diaz. Let's bring him in too.
Dave Diaz.
Dave, how you doing?
Cousin Dave.
Hello, Dave.
How's it going there, Uncle John?
Going well for, the kind of year it's been.
Yeah.
Hell of a year.
2024 has to be better with all the shit that we've been through as a little radio family or
I
whatever.
still got all these that Uncle Dave gave me that are not put up. I've got 4 of them that he gave me about a year ago to put up in the studio when we were painting it. But I've got the canister lights. So these have got a hinge up on the rafters up above me.
You got
And
the
then they've all got the God, what do they call these? That kind of window.
where they shutter.
That goes
Barn doors.
Barn doors.
Yeah.
So I've got all the barn doors that go with them. I've just got to mount them. I got to mount them and put them up. Dave was going to do that for me. So now I got to do it.
Let's talk about
I can hear the request coming now.
Yeah. So we'll get those hooked up and we'll get some nice lighting. I'll probably put one way back there, maybe a couple back there and a couple up front. And we'll get some neat gels going and some shadows and things like that and do something kind of cool down here. So we'll see. It's just work.
Will come out. I was talking about the canned microphone. You remember they used to have the microphones that hung down and it had like the round disc in the middle of it. They always had the spit filter.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, I always thought about that when I see that movie where they record their song. It's like, hey, I'm not telling tales out of school. But that's a man ought to pay you to sing into his can. Oh, like I said, I like that movie.
I dragged David along to a seminar on lighting one time.
Oh, nice.
And when we were driving back to Rochester, he says, we're 2 common professions separated by terminology for the same stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's truth.
Yeah.
So, Dave, what's going on with you, man?
Actually, nothing. I'm really bored right now. Trying to find something to do, but
Why are you so bored?
I don't know.
what is it they say? The land of fun, sun, and sin.
Are you Ronry?
Yeah.
I'm so Ronry.
I'm so wrong. Yeah, I'm all by myself. Nothing to do.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you came in.
Well, thanks for having me. Give me something to do here.
Yeah. Remember, share and like and all that other stuff. We need a we need a bigger Las Vegas contingent. If we're going to have, a symposium of the whole radio family, we need it to be in Vegas.
Whoops.
Oh, Dave. No.
Did I just get rid of Dave? Hold on, Dave.
Hold on, Dave.
I did that by accident. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I put my hand up here and I hit a button.
Yeah. We need our symposium in Vegas. Yep.
Where's Wendy at?
In the bed.
Oh, she's in bed. She's 6 hours ahead of us.
Oh,
so it's almost 11 here, which would make it 5 a.m. there.
Yeah.
Almost 5 a.m. there.
It's time to wake her.
Yeah, wake up.
Wake up time.
Yeah, she would love that. Hey, Wendy, wake up.
There's one out of the four of us here that would probably get a really, really good bollocking for that phone call.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So don't call her.
But all you do is just say F and Dave did it.
Yeah. That was Uncle Dave.
Yeah.
So,
Uncle Dave's the one that did it.
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, I was going to tell you, remember Uncle Dave, the older guy with the beard and stuff like that?
Yes.
That passed away? That's Uncle John. That's his brother.
Oh.
Have you met John before?
No.
On the show? Seen him on the show? This is Uncle Dave's brother.
I've seen him on the show, but I haven't. We weren't introduced.
I think you probably knew that Uncle Dave passed. It was 3 months ago yesterday.
Yeah.
So
poor
he would have been 60 years old yesterday.
Yeah.
And you know what my kids said to me? John, you'll appreciate this. Maybe everybody else will too. My 11-year-old Rowan said, Dad, we have to go out and celebrate Uncle Dave's birthday. It's his 60th birthday today. This was yesterday. And she said, I can only think of one place that would be good. We got to go for Chinese.
Yeah.
That's so crazy. We couldn't do it last night.
My neighbor's
we did it tonight.
Her birthday. She was 60 years old yesterday too.
Who?
My neighbor, Miss Margaret, next door. She turned 60 years old yesterday.
Right on. Happy birthday.
So they had the same birthday and the same age. That's wild. That is wild.
But so we went out and I
3 years ago before I hit 60.
Do what? You got some feedback, Dave.
I got 3 years ago before I hit 60.
Oh, 3 years ago.
All right. You're just a pup.
Yeah, just a pup. Yeah.
So
I'm a Toys R Us kid. I don't want to grow up.
Yeah, really. That's about it.
Yeah, you grow up, you grow old, then you die.
We got Professor Bauer hanging in the wings. Let's bring him in.
Professor Bauer. Gentlemen.
Oh, Lord. It looks like he
Who came in?
Professor Bauer.
Who came in?
Professor Bauer's in.
He said gentlemen.
Yeah.
You guys are so damn young.
And that includes all y'all.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
God.
He crawled out of the ball pit at the Toys R Us. Don't feel bad. Lord.
I just got done watching World War Z.
How'd that go?
Yeah.
Have you guys seen that movie?
I saw that.
Yeah.
I have quite some time ago.
20 years ago. You're behind.
Something here that came undone. There we go.
I had no idea that was the whole thing about zombies.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's clearly, I think it was 2006 or
it was about zombies and the bags under Brad Pitt's eyes.
Yeah, and
it's all the first movie you ever saw bags under his eyes.
And it's all about an uncurable virus, if that makes any sense.
And the zombies were fast in that movie.
So they got extremely animated with whatever it was that infected them, and the moral or the end of the story was they had to infect everybody with a nasty virus that would make them invisible to all the people who had the real zombie shit.
Yeah, they couldn't see it.
And I thought, I've seen a number of flicks lately that seem to have some kind of relevance to what we seem to be going through now. And it's quite interesting to see and it's kind of like watching South Park, right?
Are you talking current events is like watching South Park?
Well, yeah. Well, it's like looking at South Park and all of the, prophetic things they did in their little cartoon series, and then you go watch a movie that expands on whatever it was that they went after. And I'm thinking,
right.
I think there's a little bit more to this predictive programming going on than we may realize.
Hey, look,
Professor.
The Simpsons has predicted Donald Trump president and all this other stuff. The Simpsons have a hell of a track record on predicting future events.
Yeah, they do.
It is scary how close they have come to like naming even the thing that we can't say on YouTube that was sent over.
Well, YouTube has stopped banning two things that was grounds for not only being banned but being demonetized, deplatformed, and all that. One is the 2020 election, and the other is the virus origins over out of the lab. I mean,
you
3
can
years
now
ago,
talk about both of those things on YouTube?
You're free to talk about that shit now.
Nice.
On YouTube.
Nice.
And it's kind of interesting because it seems as though that the only time that the content that gets banned or, steps out of bounds of the narrative is what is going on at the time.
Yeah.
But now, after time passes,
once it's passed,
it's like, well, we can let them talk about that now because we're not trying to control that particular part of the narrative.
We're not controlling the narrative now.
Professor.
Yes, sir.
One of the most interesting things in World War Z was how Israel set their defense policy.
Yeah.
Built that big old wall.
Well, not just that, but do you remember the part where he's explaining that they almost got wiped out because one person was saying, we're going to be attacked. And everybody else said, no, they're not going to attack us. And they just about pushed them back into the ocean. We were young when that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so their defense policy was now set. Like if everybody said, this is going to happen. And one guy goes, no, this is going to happen. They do what the minority report is rather than what everybody thought made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were ready to fight zombies because one guy said, no, it's going to be zombies this time. And instead of putting him in an asylum, they revamped and built a wall around the country. And
speaking of the walls, Texas just enacted their National Guard because the governor there said that they're being invaded.
Mm-hmm.
And if they thought the Constantine War was bad, what are they going to say about the National Guard manning the border?
Well, I think it was New York was also calling out the National Guard as well. I mean, it's interesting how when you see the narrative, which is the narrative and that's in the paradigm, right?
Mm-hmm. I got that.
When you see the initial pushback or the initial creation of the narrative is, there's nothing wrong with the border. And then everybody else says, well, actually, there is a whole bunch of problems with the border. Well, no, you're just, right-wing conspiracy theory nuts and lunatics and all of that. And then as time goes on, it turns out to be exactly what the people were saying it was going to be, or it was even at the time. And it just gets orders of magnitude more visibly a problem. And I think that, so I'll throw this little nugget in because I've been thinking about it. Artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Okay. Artificial intelligence right now is taking out all the oxygen out of the air. And it's primarily being driven by this OpenAI or the Chat GPT that everybody's using. Okay. What people don't realize is that the problem with the current AI is that it is written and developed and designed by people with an ideological bent.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all kinds of examples. The simplest one is You can go to Chat GPT. I think 5 just got released, and you can say, write me something about Biden's accomplishments, and it'll spit out, a whole bunch of hooey. And then you can turn right around and say, write me something about Trump's accomplishments, and it'll come back and say, I'm sorry, we can't put anything together on such a controversial issue and or subject. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's clearly from an ideological bent that's put into what's known as the prompt.
Controlling the
right. So there's two things in AI. There's the prompt scripting language and there's the large language models, which back in the 90s when I was doing my tech career used to be called business intelligence and big data. So this is like the new version. It's the upgrade of that. And even search, Alexa and Siri, all of this AI stuff is all of these expert systems and these assisted intelligence on steroids. Okay. So I woke up at about 4 a.m. on Sunday in the middle of a download. And I was thinking about, because I'm in the middle of this blockchain AI stuff, working on my own projects. And I thought, what's going on with AI right now that is really not only the issue, but is potentially, where is there a cure for it? So if all of the AI out there is basically written with a progressive neo-lib ideology intent and perspective, where is there the equivalent for people who have a conservative or a traditionalist viewpoint? Because there is a boatload of data in the large language models, which is nothing more than a bunch of databases scattered across the internet. Mm-hmm. There's a whole bunch of that content out there, but where's the AI, the prompt scripting that's using that language or using the data? And all that is words. People don't realize that AI is nothing more than a pattern recognition system. Okay. It looks at the words and it says, okay, what are the words around those words in these databases? Okay, let me concoct something based on the patterns that I see. So then I thought, one of the biggest challenges for people who are not in the neo-lib progressive ideology bubble and echo chamber is that there isn't anything on the conservative side. And I started thinking, conservatives really aren't tech savvy. They're not the guys and the people that go out there and start playing with tech. It's right. All these libs in the high tech world. And I thought, what if somebody wrote an AI to go over conservative and traditional databases? Because there's a boatload of content out there.
To start teaching themselves?
No, I mean, to me, it's a way to combat or at least to level the field. Yeah. Because there's so much of this ideology is what fuels a lot of this big tech and this AI stuff that we're seeing out there. And there's nothing being written for conservative thought or conservative ideologies or moderate ideologies. It's all very left oriented. And I started thinking somebody needs to do that. Because if they did, the amount of content that is quote unquote in that conservative traditionalist viewpoint far exceeds what's out there in the liberal side. The liberal side is very narrow. It's very focused. You look at all the people they're trying to take down, from Russell Brand being the latest to what they did with Tucker Carlson, what they've done to RFK Jr., Trump. I mean, there is a litany of voices that have been purposely silenced because they don't comport to the ideology that's being used by the technoids on the left. Mm-hmm. Well, by God, I think that I know there's a whole bunch of rich conservatives out there. Yeah. I'm thinking maybe we should put together a GoFundMe to do a conservative AI.
Yeah.
And do you suppose anybody's out there working on that yet?
I haven't found any. It would seem very logical to me, but I think it's one way to combat this.
We need something to combat Skynet.
Oh yeah, he froze. I was going to say
they got him. They got him. Look at it, froze him.
They got you, Doc. Oh, yeah, we thought they got you.
They got you. They stopped you from talking.
Yeah, I knew they were watching and listening, but I mean, at some point, somebody is going to do this.
Yeah,
and I think that what it's going to reveal is that the ideologies are where the problem is.
Yeah.
It's common sense. I think what we need is an ideas party or a logic party or a common sense party.
Well, I've always said if I was going to form a political party, I would call it the Common Sense Party.
Yeah.
I have said that. Now, I'm not the guy to lead it because I'm a dipshit. But I think that there are people who could lead it that are smarter than I am, but they'd have to go with my name, the Common Sense Party.
But you know, Professor, hey, I'm not good at writing, but I have racked and stacked and pulled more miles of cable than anybody that I know around here. But and they always said, Michael, you're a good pair of smart hands. I was like, well, that's about as good as it gets.
No, Michael would be our black ops guy.
Oh yeah.
Well, I graduated 6th grade, so I'm good.
All right.
But
you graduated? I just left.
Yeah.
Adios.
I would
Jethro
circulate it out.
Bodine.
Yeah. Hey, that's how I feel. That's like I was telling y'all the other day. Every time I go to puppy school on Sunday, there's this damn golden doodle or whatever. It makes me and that dog look like we're running backwards. They just look at that dog even before they said to tell it to sit or stay or whatever. It's just like, and here me and Poseidon over there going, really? We got to follow that shit? Why can't we go first? But
Well,
no,
I got one to throw out there. Have you guys heard about October 4th? What's going to happen?
Yeah, the emergency broadcast system.
Oh.
Yes,
Oh,
exactly. But they're going to let it go for what, 30 minutes?
Wow.
Yeah, apparently
Why?
they're supposed to tap everybody's phone. Everybody's supposed to get a message that to show that you've connected to it.
Even if you shut your phone off, they'll turn it back on.
Yeah, it's supposed to be at 2 p.m. Eastern, I think.
Oh Lord.
I think that's the time that they've set. But last week we were talking about the future and the world-changing events that the remote viewers and the astrologers and the numerologists and tarot readers and so forth are seeing. And one thing I didn't mention was that there was a lot of chatter about 9/23, which was last Saturday.
Yeah.
And numerologically in particular, that date, the 9/23, 3/29, 2/93, 2/39, there was a lot of chatter about that, and nothing seemed to happen, at least that we were able to see in the public sphere. But it seems as like, I don't know about you guys, but there seems to be some shit afoot. There's a bunch of fuckery going on in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And
I agree with you.
and it seems as though maybe with enough awareness that by people like us having this conversation, for example, that getting that information out that there is something afoot could potentially skew the plan. Because if people are paying attention and looking for something to happen, then they might get caught while they're trying to pull it off. That's a Sun Tzu Art of War tactic as well.
Yes.
To do a distraction while you're actually doing something else. But at first I thought it was financial. But I got to tell you, the more I'm watching this political landscape, it has got to be. It's one of the most insane circus shit shows that I've seen in my 66 years. And I'm looking at it going, I think what's really going to happen is it's going to have something to do with Biden. The guy is decomposing in front of us. And then you've got Trudeau up there in Canada who's doing some of the most insane shit. And he's got India pissed off at him. And then he has a Nazi up there that they're all cheering last week.
That was the best thing in the whole world to see. You're going like, do you have any idea what that means?
They don't. And and people forget India is a nuclear nation.
That's right.
They have the bomb. And it might not be a warhead that drops on American soil, but they're a part of NORAD, the North American Treaty or whatever it is. And and if he pisses them off enough and they feel that offended that they have to make a first strike, then all the rest of it comes in with it. The only saving grace they might have is that there is an idiot controlling the football.
The problem I see with something like that going on is I think that the United States, the higher government, all them other people, they're surrendering the United States. They open up the borders. They're allowing all these, to say, other people to come in. You ever see the movie the Red Dawn 2012 version?
Yeah.
Where
not the 2012 version.
Where they fly in and just drop the soldiers in. They don't have to bring any vehicle because they're already here.
Oh, Red Dawn.
Yeah.
Yes. They're already here.
I mean, all you got to do is look at the folks that are lined up and going through the border, and they're all military age men. You don't see families, you don't see women,
exactly.
Right?
So what they're doing is they're setting up these cells in the United States, and they're going to attack from within. Simple fact.
If you look at pictures of people coming in as refugees to other countries from the Ukraine, father, mother, little kids getting their families to safety. You look at who's coming in here, and it's almost all military age men.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And where are they going?
Everywhere.
Exactly. They're paying for them, from what I've heard.
Yeah.
And I've seen the stories, but what am I to say? That they're paying for them to go to these places all over the United States. And to me, it seems like they're building up what you call those little sleeper cells when the time hits.
Yeah.
Hey, Professor, have you heard of Dr. Savage, Michael Savage?
Oh, yeah. I've been listening to him for over 20 years.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. But, 20-some years ago, he was preaching borders, language, and culture. You cannot have a country without your borders being secure. Secure your culture and your language.
Yeah.
And he said when you had to start pressing one for English, your primary language, and everybody's like, oh, no, he's an asshole, be inclusive. And one of the things I just learned in critical thinking, one of the things is called a slippery slope. And, and it can apply to a lot of things. Well, let's just give them a little bit. If you give them a little bit, they want a little more.
Yep.
Well, that wasn't.
And it never goes back.
And it never goes back. Oh, let's give them a little more. And my professor asked me a question. What was it? Difference between persuasive and manipulating something? Can you have a persuasive conversation, or are you manipulating the person or the narrative? I get it. You want to persuade people to vote for your party, but it seems like to me that they have went on the other hand and started manipulating people's fears, and it overrides common sense. Then they're able to do shit in the open and not hide it. You know what?
Well, I completely agree, and I think that's actually been going on for at least 3 decades. The infiltration of the parasites, intellectual and mental parasites, into the school system, and it's not education; it's schooling.
Yeah,
those are 2 different things.
Yeah,
it's
indoctrination. Yeah,
yeah, and it's like Twain said: "I never let my schooling get in the way of my education."
Yes.
But what they did is they swapped out how to think with what to think.
Yeah.
And it became easier to get along and to make, navigate through reality and create a life by utilizing what you were told to think.
Yeah.
When you look at, as far as I'm concerned, we are watching the complete, not only the meltdown of the political system, starting with the left-leaning side of the 2 wings of the same bird.
Oh yeah,
those guys are eating themselves from within, and they're doing it in full frontal. I mean, they've gotten to the point to where they are so blatant in what they're doing that you can't hide it anymore.
Yeah.
But we're also seeing the complete meltdown of the 5th state, right, which is the media. We no longer have a system of checks and balances because we don't actually have a country, we have a corporation.
You know, what was it in Vietnam? When Cronkite came out and said the war is unwinnable, that's when they decided to pull out. But years ago, I was a young man, and I lived not too far from Cherokee, North Carolina. And I figured out my grandmother on my mom's side had some Native American there, whatever. She said, Michael, we're Indian. I'm like, okay. So I got hammered drunk and went down to buy me a pair of moccasins. I later found out that the guy that took the picture was wearing Reeboks, and I was paying him $10 for a picture. But anyway, but I asked him, I said, I about died, you know what I'm saying? And I asked him, I said, me being Native American, the whitest thing that they had ever seen on the reservation, I wanted to know how my people were supposed to vote. And he told me years ago, and I hear that, two wings of the same bird. And this guy, he might have been out there peddling his pictures. His whole sign said, the world's most photographed Indian chief. I'm like, okay. So I went over and asked him. I figured if he's a chief, he might be able to give me some knowledge on what my political stance should be. And I asked him, I said, it's two wings. And I asked him, I said, how we vote? He said, it's two wings of the same bird. And, and I have carried it with me for a long time. And I asked him, I said, I asked you for an opinion. I didn't ask for a damn riddle, dude. I bought your picture. And he said, Michael, how well does a one-winged bird fly? And I thought, well, probably flying a fucking circle. I'm a good old boy. I grew up on the farm. I've seen some things with broken wings. And he said, it takes one for the other one. He said, let me break it down to you. He said, it's good cop, bad cop. If they want you to go right, they push a hard left, they bring you back right. Or if they want you to go whatever, and they play that mind fuckery game with you.
Yeah.
Well, let's go so far this way that these people will pull us back here. Or let's go so far this, and he said it's a tug of war with your mind all the time. But they actually made it legal under one of the presidents that they at the CIA could run ops in the United States. And when the CIA was first brought together, it was forbidden for them to do any ops on American soil.
That was the FBI's responsibility.
Yeah, the FBI. Yeah. Anything with three letters, I'm like, no, I don't even like alphabet soup. All right. But no, it's but that came out of what was it, the SAS and the before the CIA was it
OSI.
OSI, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I don't know if you and Scotty you're a lot older than me, and I can't remember shit. Y'all's mind's good. Like I said, it's been a day, but yeah, and
it's all right.
And they learned from the British during the OSS.
Mm-hmm.
Do whatever you want to do, just don't blame it on us.
Well, a lot of people don't realize that, at the end of World War II, when we did Operation Paperclip.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Okay. When we brought over all those Nazi engineers and scientists, we also brought over the intelligence. And Galen was in charge of the SS. I think it was the SS over in Germany. And Galen is the one who formed our CIA. In fact, the entire intelligence was initially, he got control because we wanted to get intelligence back into Germany. He had his network there. So he convinced them that, well, I'll do that over there. And because they're all my guys, and we'll go ahead and do that here as well. So the actual history of our intelligence systems and the institutions, when Truman realized what had happened, he said, look, this is going to be a disaster. And when Eisenhower came out after Truman and said, okay, you got to watch out for the military industrial complex, they had already gotten their claws into the governmental system. Well, from there, they got their claws into the corporations. And it was kind of a nasty marriage that they needed to do because they knew they could control everything if they had those relationships. Well, now we don't have a country. We have corporations. We have a corporatocracy. The corporations are the ones that own the politicians, that own the government, that control the government. And those corporations are the ones who are also controlling somewhat, because there's some autonomy in the intelligence agencies. But if you watch the intelligence agencies, the heads and the key people, when they exit the intelligence, they go work at the corporations.
Oh, yeah.
And you go, well, okay, so there's a symbiosis and a bunch of basic fornication that's going on between the corporations and the government. So we've now got a broken government. We've got a broken media. We've got broken schooling. We've got broken science and academic institutions. We've got broken entertainment. I mean, you look at it and when you were talking about, how they were creating the narrative and how they were directing the minds and controlling people. Well, they infiltrated all these basic pillars of our fabric and society, and they've been running it, and they've run it into the ground. It's now to the point where it's not only cannot function any further, but it's blatantly obvious that it's falling apart, that it's eating itself from within and it's falling apart from without.
And you would think that would be the catalyst to repair it, fix it, and make it better. That should be the catalyst.
Right.
But you don't have enough people that are recognizing that that's the case. Or if they do recognize it, they will admit that that's the case. And this is the willful misinformation of the public. And I hate to say it, guys, but that's almost got to wrap us up tonight. This is Professor Bauer. You're scoring, you're batting 100 for coming in the last few minutes of every show and introducing a topic we could spend the next 2 hours on.
I was going to tell him to send me a friend request. He didn't send me, because me and him needs to write that chat thing for conservative.
Yeah, you're on Facebook as Dr. Michael Brewer.
No, just Michael Lee. I'm just Michael.
Michael Lee. Okay, I'll dig you up.
Yeah, because the other Michael's my son.
You can find me as
Dr. Sex Kitten.
You can find me as Robert Bauer on there. I'm also, you can go to robertbauer.com, and that's where you can find me and all my shit anyway. But yeah, I'll dig you up. That's I think somebody's got to put this together as an alternative at a minimum, and as a balancing component to the narrative that's going on out there. If everybody's going to go putting their time, effort, and resources into AI, conservatives, I mean, we're still the only ones, or people that consider themselves in the conservative kind of ideology, the only ones with any humor that can tell a joke and mean it as a joke, and everybody else can laugh at it. AI doesn't do jokes real well. AI also doesn't do math real well, but AI will take all the content that you've put out there and it'll put together a nice crafty piece of literature for you. And I think that needs to be out there as a balance to the bullshit that we're getting out of the wrong side of the bird.
I'll be the first.
Before we leave,
right up.
Before we leave, I want to try one little bit of humor with you all. I'm going to teach you, may have heard this. I'm going to teach you how to speak with a Scottish accent with 4 American words.
Oh, shit.
Okay, you believe I can do that? Here we go. Say these words after me. Whale.
Whale.
Oil.
Oil.
Beef.
Beef.
Hooked.
Well, all be fucked.
Well, oil be fucked. Say them all fast. Well, oil be fucked.
Well, oil be fucked.
Now you can all speak with a Scottish accent.
I've been wanting to do that for a long time. Thanks for that lesson.
There it is. You're welcome, and you know where to give me credit.
I know where to go get more.
Where to get more. There's more where that came from.
Since you guys are all selling books, James Tarr, you can find him on Amazon, the Fallen Empire series, beginning with the collapse. And for some reason, the thread of those 3 books is running through our conversations.
Yep.
But I highly recommend him.
James Tarr?
It's the best of his work.
Good to know.
How do you spell his last name?
James Tarr, Tarr.
Tarr. Awesome.
Tar.
As in Johnny Tarr.
James Tarr.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to let you go one by one. David, since you were the last one. No, you weren't the last one.
No,
yeah,
they-
you were. No,
Professor
Bauer.
No, I am. Get rid of me.
Professor, I'm getting rid of you first.
Yeah.
Cheers,
Love you, brother.
gentlemen.
We'll see
Take
you again
care.
soon. And then, David, you're next. See ya.
Yep, he's there. Yep, he's there.
And Uncle John.
Oh, that'd be me.
Yeah,
Good to see you tonight. Love you, brother. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, John
and
said
Michael,
present.
good
Yeah.
to see you. We'll see you later.
Did
Have a
you
good
hear me?
night.
He said present.
Yeah,
When you said his name, yeah, present. Yeah, thought he was running
Hey,
for governor.
get out of here. See you later. All right, everybody else, I want to thank you for being part of the show tonight. Thanks for listening to the radio show part of it, and for being part of the Captain's Cabin. And we'll be back again on Friday, day after tomorrow. And so make your plans accordingly for 9 p.m. Friday evening. So thank you for being here. And all of you, once again, live long and prosper.